Hey, everybody, welcome to the Deviant Mind. This is Dominika,
And this is Chris.
and hopefully the sound issues will be okay. I'm outside next to a tennis court, which is a little wild. And hopefully the sound deadening things will work out. And this today, we have a case, another female, actually, very, very tragic, by the name of Susan, is her Susan Smith, right?
Susan Smith.
Susan Smith in North Carolina, I believe. Union, North Carolina.
Yep. Union, North Carolina. That's right.
Yeah. So sex, betrayal, and murder today on the Deviant Mind.
Yeah. So Susan was born on September 26, 1971, to parents that were in a most volatile relationship, really couldn't stand one another. They divorced when she's 6 years old, and it wouldn't be long before both her mom remarries and her biological father commits suicide. So these things greatly affected her. And then eventually down the line, she becomes a young teenager, and her stepfather is suddenly sexually abusing her. The mother is aware of what's going on. Susan Smith brings this to her school counselor, sits down with her. They bring in the parents. The stepfather is like, it happens, but it's not as bad as she's portraying this. Like, I'm just overly affectionate. Nothing happens. A second time, she brings it up to another school counselor, as now she's maybe like 16 years old, and this is still happening. And same thing. Nothing is really done about it. So she's basically living in this house with a pedophile. Her mom seems to be okay with this abuse. But perhaps we should, as we tend to do, Dominica, is go back and talk about the victims in this case, yes. Which is extremely just shocking. It's basically her two children, Michael Smith, who's age 3, and Alex Smith, who's 14 months old. And
right.
They were both. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, they were both young. And again, this is one of those cases where the mother is under suspicion for the crime pretty immediately, and also has a major hint of racism, where she claimed that a black man had hijacked her car with her 2 kids inside.
Yeah.
What she really had done was taken the kids to a, was it a pond or a lake, and essentially let them, essentially drown them in the car, like let the car go with them strapped inside of their car seats. And when she said that they were missing and that this black man had taken her car, but the police, from my understanding, were suspicious of her immediately.
Yes. She was immediately on the suspect list. The social impact, again, here we go. This is, by the way, this is all occurring in 1994. So it's in the Carolinas, and it's a society that still believes, of course, it's got to be a black person. And her story changed. She at first said that she parked outside of a Walmart, and when she came out, she saw a black person sort of breaking into her car, taking the car and running. Then she changed it to she was at a red light and got carjacked by a car coming the other direction, driven by a black man. Black man forcibly takes her out and then just drives off. Police would later determine that it was nearly impossible for that to have happened to be at a green. Oh, it pulled up alongside her, not coming the other way. I beg your pardon. The roads are set up as such as the green light is continuous until a car from another direction comes, at which point they go red. So theory being is like that couldn't possibly have happened. The light would have been green, and there's no way a car next to her going the same direction would have
I see.
done that.
Right.
So that was the first indicator, and that was the first thing. Also, during her interrogation, she says that she kind of knows what he looks like, and as the police artist is drawing the sketch, she's getting details wrong, and it's kind of like she's making it up on the spot. She takes the lie detector test 3 times, fails every time. The first test is inconclusive. The other 2 she fails. Her husband, David, passes, flying colors. So David is completely not a suspect. In fact, he too is a victim in this whole thing. I mean, they were his children. He had no clue what was going on. And he's appearing on television with her, and they're pleased to, find their children. But she, in her first TV appearance, blames a black person, which instantly angers and upsets the black communities, obviously. And then what happens is police are pulling over black men based on her sketch. And so many of them have nothing to do, obviously, with this. But it's so easy to blame at this point in time. And any time, really. I mean, history has proven that this has happened time and again, that it's a black person. We got to go up to a black person. And of course, America sees her and they believe it.
Which is awful. It's absolutely awful.
But her idea at the time of putting her children down the ramp, she claimed that it was a suicide attempt. And she at the last moment decided to hop out of the vehicle.
That's right. Because she had actually tried to attempt suicide when she was 13, right?
Yes. She had a few suicide attempts, very depressed, molested by her stepfather. Her own father committed suicide. And she had been diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, which was never treated. And she can't explain why she did this. And in 2000, she pled not guilty by reason of insanity, which they completely did not agree with. They felt that she was completely competent. And I just want to go back to her television appearances. She's very weird. She fake cries a lot. And by fake crying, I mean, she goes through the motions of crying, but there are no tears. There are no indicators of grief. And her husband is right next to her and shows way more grief and not saying a word than she does. And she sort of rambles. So yes, she has this history of suicide attempts. She claims it was a suicide attempt, but for some reason at the last minute, she hops out. And as the car is rolling, she's helpless. She can't figure out what to do. And is submerged rather quickly. And so at this time in society, black on white crime in 1994, robberies 36%, murders 6%, and rape was 9%. And this is also the same time after this case, we have Tawana Brawley, if anyone remembers her and her teaming up with Reverend Al Sharpton, where she claimed that she was getting raped by a group of white men, which actually wound up being false. So it's interesting. There was a reverse
situation that happened. Yeah.
Right.
How did because I don't know if I actually read this in my research, but did the police, did her husband give her up, or like, how did the police find out about all the affairs she was having?
So, yeah, they were both rather promiscuous, and both at one point, they really weren't getting along, especially after Alex was born. And they had a very on again, off again relationship. And it came to a point where it seems as though they had an open relationship, as both were having extramarital affairs. And she really fell for what Union called the catch. Now, the catch is a fella named
Tom Finlay.
Huh?
Is it Tom Finlay?
Yes, Tom Finlay, the catch of Union. Very wealthy fella. He was the vice president of his father's Conso company. Conso is responsible for the distribution and manufacturing of decorations, curtains, rugs, furniture.
And he was only 27 at the time.
Only 27 at the time, very wealthy, very handsome. And she is working actually as a secretary for Conso. And after a very little time, she moves up and becomes the private secretary of the CEO, Corey Finley. And he's essentially the owner and CEO of this company.
And so that would be Tom's father?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And so he was actually the one who was attracted to Susan, Tom was. And around town, it started, there was a rumor, maybe, because of her rocky marriage, she's gonna get the catch. And then basically, ultimately, she does get the catch. And they do have a relationship. She has this idea in her head, I'm going to start a brand new life with the catch. With Tom, I'll be set. David's really not worth this relationship. We're arguing so much. And that's when they were together. And she had Alex actually, so when they have Alex, they split up. Smith and her husband David actually split up. And so this would make sense in the timeline of when she meets Tom. They're like, they're not really together. No, they're not sleeping in the same place. And then December 1993 is the official time that Susan and Tom form this relationship. In March, Tom actually starts keeping a distance from Susan because David finds out and actually threatens him.
Yikes.
Leave Susan alone. She's not yours. She loves me. We have children together. And then it wasn't long after this where Susan confronts Tom and says, listen, I'm done with David. Like, it's just you and me. Like, I have nothing to do with David. I just have my kids. And at this time, 21, 22 years old, she's having a relationship with Tom Finlay. She's still kind of sleeping with her husband. And she's still having this weird sexual relationship with her stepfather.
Which we should actually talk about Mr. Beverly C. Russell Jr. And just to kind of, go with Susan, and this is, of course, no excuse for what she did, because that was one of the most horrible acts I think anybody could ever do. It was very difficult to research this case because of the fact of two babies strapped into the backseat of a car. Like, I don't understand what kind of monster can do that. But that same monster did lose her father, Harry, by suicide. She kept his coin collection and audio tape of his voice in her drawer all the way until she was in high school. And then so her mom meets this dude named Beverly C. Russell Jr., who was a local businessman. And her mother, Linda, married him in 1979. And he had 3 kids of his own. And he actually became prominent in both the state Republican Party and the Christian Coalition. And Susan had, I believe it was 2 brothers. And they said that this man, Beverly Russell, kept the family together because they were falling apart because of the suicide of their dad.
Yeah.
But at the same time, again, this kind of really surprised me, and you could tell how difficult of a time she was having. So she tried to commit suicide, as we said, when she was 13. In high school, she was actually a pretty good student from what I was able to find. She was in the National Honor Society, and she was also voted friendliest girl in her yearbook. And she seemed, very attractive. Mind you, when she did this horrible, horrible thing, she was only 23. So I can't imagine having two babies at 23. And when you have a totally disturbed suicidal individual who is also still sleeping with her stepfather. I don't know if you mentioned this, but she had slept with her stepfather a month before she drowned her children.
Yeah. I didn't
So
mention it, but yeah, that's there. And then did we mention that he was a stockbroker at the time he marries her mom?
yeah, so he was wealthy as well,
Right.
and they
Right.
did go to the police 2 times and said that he had fondled her breasts
Yeah. Yeah.
and he had put her hand on his genitals after she had crawled into his lap to go to sleep one evening. Now,
Yeah.
so here's my other thing when that was, and this is not trying to shame anybody whatsoever, but for a 16-year-old to be going onto her stepfather's lap is, I'm already seeing that that 16-year-old is in distress, right? Like that sounds like somebody who um I don't know if she was childlike at 16, but there's like, again, she had tried to commit suicide at 13, but there's
Right.
something happening in her mental state for
Yes.
a girl to do something like that at 16. And then, of course, he jumps on the opportunity, which is filthy and disgusting. And he lost, I think he lost everything finally after she killed her children. And
Mhm.
it came out that he was still sleeping with her all that time
Yeah.
later. And his community completely turned on him. Her mom divorced him. And I mean, quite frankly, he should be put on the sex offender list as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Um, but which I don't believe happened. But I
No,
just,
I don't believe it ever did. And incidentally, yeah, she's 16 when she tells her mom for the first time what's happening, and
I,
the counselor at school. Beverly actually admitted it, and nothing was done, and he kept doing it. And then at 17, she tells the counselor this time, and then police are involved. But her mom, tells him not to press charges.
oh, really?
Yeah. So multiple attempts at suicide, and actually one of her attempts gets her put into a psychiatric treatment center. And then going back to what you were saying earlier regarding the case, I know we're jumping around here, but she was actually a suspect from the very start. And it was 9 days that Michael and Alex were missing. And then ninth day, that was it. The confession came out. So yeah, you know, so she multiple suicide attempts as we've discussed, and actually one of them gets her put into a psychiatric treatment center. And as you said earlier, not meaning to jump around, but she was indeed a suspect from the very start. Very odd behavior, very weird body language during all the interviews, and she doesn't even really mention the children during her appearances and her pleading with America to help locate these children. But yeah, the children are missing for 9 days, carjacked by a black man, and then
Right, supposedly.
and then eventually she confesses. So that's how it ends. It's basically she gives a confession.
Now, did they actually start looking in bodies of water for the kids? I seem to remember having read something like that and I couldn't find it in my notes. How did they know? Did she confess and tell them exactly which lake that she had done this at?
I believe so. I believe
Okay.
she just broke down and she tells the cop on the ninth day, please pray for me. Can I
Mhm.
have some paper? And she wrote everything out. So
Ah,
in that written confession, it's where I did this, where the ramp was, and yeah, that's how they found everything out. You know?
I see. And now, did we talk about the infamous letter that Tom had sent her that they think is the reason why she killed her children in the first place?
Yes. Well, so they're having this relationship despite David's threats. It's on again, off again. Uh, at a 1994 office party, Susan and some other people at this party are naked in a pool. And Tom happens to walk out and see Susan making out with the husband of another woman that works at Conso.
Oh my.
He's absolutely disgusted. He can't believe it. And he breaks up with her on the spot. So the hot tub breakup happens October 19th.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I stand correct here, yeah. So that's October 19th, right?
Mm-hmm.
The children and go missing October 25th.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we're starting with this, oh my God, I got caught. I didn't mean it. I love Tom. And the very next day on the 20th, she leaves a note card for David apologizing, saying that she will always love him. And then Tom gives her a card back in person, which basically says, I wish I could be with you, but there are many things about you which don't match my lifestyle. And so she basically starts stalking him, sending him flowers. He has her removed from the office at one point because he's like, enough is enough. And then that is when this note comes out. And actually, I back up. Before he writes the letter to her explaining everything and why they're done, she busts in and says, hey, Tom, David, my husband, is following me. My life is in danger. My stepdad is molesting me constantly. And I'm sleeping with your father.
Oh my goodness.
So she lays all of this on him. And this is when he's like, get out. Security leads her out. She comes back and says, I'm sorry, I'm lying. Like, I never actually did that with your dad. David isn't trying to kick. And so again, she's kicked out of the building. Hours later, if not less, she basically kills her children. This is when it I'm sorry. She gets a letter from him, right? After all this, he sits down and composes a letter. And in it is, for starters, your children. I don't want children. And he makes mention about how they just come from very different backgrounds. Pretty much snotty, like, look, right. I'm the vice president of my dad's company. I'm wealthy. You don't really, you're kind of poor. Like he, very subtly makes mention of their class differences and the fact she has children. And then it's 9 hours after receiving that letter, she basically goes ahead with this murder. It's absolutely a spiral. I think it's her not knowing how to deal with the situation, just so much influence from her childhood. She sees, in her own relationship, they're not very close. It looks like they can get a divorce anytime they want. That's like her parents. The molestation, it becomes normalized. I mean, when you have a counselor and your mom not pressing charges, it manifests this like deep depression. This is my fault. It's shame. It's everything, right?
Yeah. My dad killed himself. He didn't. I mean, I know there's a lot of, the suicide is extremely difficult if she thought that was her fault as well. I never really found why she said she committed suicide at 13. It sounded like that was before she started getting molested by her stepdad. So,
yes, that was before.
Yeah. So, but, at the same time, you see like a very disturbed individual, who it seems like she was drowning, so that when Tom sent her that letter being like, we're done, which again, I don't know what she was thinking about, again, kissing and being naked in a hot tub with somebody else's husband. There just obviously seems like issues with sexuality that of course stems from being sexually abused. I mean, it's just the, what am I looking for? I mean, it's so awful that it permeates so many parts of a woman's life. And then I think that is actually pretty typical to have sexual abuse victims act out sexually because they have been taught that to get love and affection and support from loved ones is through sexual acts, right? I mean, everything just gets so messed up. And this is already a very vulnerable person. And then she does something that is probably the worst thing that anybody could ever do, which is kill her children in a horrifying way. It's just,
And
yeah.
What's really interesting also, I feel, is that she and David start receiving tons of money and support for rewards. And this continues once she's in prison. People are sending her care packages. Just very weird how she, once the chief or the sergeant goes on national television and says Susan Smith has just confessed to the murder of her children, there's a huge, overwhelming gasp. Like, no one can believe it. She had everyone on her side, despite all her weirdness, despite all this information coming out, despite her being the first suspect. And there's this weird, just sort of like, even the way she can, it's all very matter of fact, which is, I find, really kind of, I can't tell if this is, she manipulates. She certainly knows how to manipulate situations.
Right.
And I feel, that's a learned behavior, probably. But she really, for 9 days, is able to capture the heart of America and the support of America, with the exception of the Black communities. And it's all matter of fact. There's never any real urgency. It's all about herself. It's all about in fact, when she first announces and goes on television in numerous interviews, she always says, my children. And she's saying she's right next to her husband. It's never our children. It's always my children, my car. It was, this happened to me. And she plays the victim. So you got to wonder, how is it possible that did she have the intent on killing herself with her children? I mean, I'm leaning towards no, because I think it was her way of saying, look, I don't have children. What's interesting is that she got out of the car gains momentum, heads off the ramp. She stood and watched. So she could have done something even at that point.
Called help, dove in to unclick her children. Like, I mean, so many things that she could have done and she didn't. So
it went down, submerged slowly. Like she. Oh
God, no!
I'm so sorry. I'm so
terrible.
But I'm so sorry. But so they had to recreate. They recreated that in court.
Oh, did they? Okay.
To show the jury the point. It was shot in the point of view of the children.
Oh my God, I can't.
And in the back of the car, and they pushed it into the water, and the jury was like, "Okay,
that's you're done."
So then comes
she didn't get the death penalty, did she?
Well, so here's the thing. There was a huge push for the death penalty. And that's where the whole issue of capital punishment comes in, right?
Yeah.
In the Carolinas, how could you possibly do this? She's got to get death. But then there's a notion, she spends the rest of her life in jail. She's got to sit and live with this. So she gets, this is really crazy. I have these, sorry. So ultimately she's arrested for 2 counts of murder. And
oh my God, Chris.
Yeah. She's ultimately arrested for 2 counts of murder, and everyone would like her to get the death penalty. Literally, everyone in Union wants her to get the death penalty.
Yeah.
And she ultimately tries to declare, or her defense is that she's mentally unfit to stand trial. And then it's determined no, she knew absolutely what she was doing. So she is due. She's presently 60 years old. Okay, she's due for parole in November 2024. So I don't believe. I mean, unless it's life with parole, I've never heard of such a thing. I think, and this is crazy, but I think she only got 30 years with chance of parole.
Oh, wow. They must have taken in her mental state.
Absolutely.
As part of the sentencing.
I mean, that was the defense's whole thing. How can you give this woman the death penalty? Clearly she's like out of her mind. she has suffered a great deal, so much trauma. It's this fine line, but it seems like perhaps it was some sort of, I mean, can this be classified as a crime of passion? Like her
Well,
love?
yeah, I mean, and because her son was only 14 months old, then there's also a question of postpartum depression. Like, did she go into
Right.
postpartum psychosis? What did the postpartum period have to do with this? Because again, she's 23 with two little babies and already has tried to commit suicide. So I have to assume there was something going on there.
The other thing is, like, she, later in her life, like early 20s, she's also diagnosed with major depression, to which her defense said, if this were taken care of earlier, perhaps none of this would have happened. If you're diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic and it's never treated, you try to commit suicide, you're put in a psychiatric treatment, and then you're released. Your mom isn't very supportive of you being molested by your own husband. Oh. There are all these factors. And what's interesting to note is at this time in society, spanking is a hot topic. There are a lot of people that are arguing that spanking was for a different time. Actually, many people are divided, parents and psychologists alike, and parental counselors strongly disagree with spanking. This is at the time. And this is also precursor to pre-Stephanie Simmons, a Black mother who killed her two children in a horrific way, and Norman Patrick Hall, also a mother. Both of them confessed to killing their children. So point being is you have these three instances in which eventually they confess. And maybe that comes from some sort of maternal guilt. Who knows? You keep a charade going. Oh, a dingo stole my baby. But then eventually the truth comes out. And in that case, I know that was a bad example because the dingo really did steal her baby. Sorry. But, even she was a suspect, and absolutely no one believed that Australian woman. I'm blanking on her name. But so what you do have is you have women, murderers of their children, coming forward and taking responsibility. Her life in jail has been a very interesting one. She's been known to manipulate fellow inmates into getting her drugs. She's had sexual relationships with prison guards to get special privileges. This is what they suspect will cause her not to get parole next year in 2024, because she just has so many strikes against her. And according to Christine Smith, who was one of her cellmates, Susan Smith was completely delusional and had conversations with herself as though her children were alive. She would speak to Max, it's going to be okay. Oh, hi, Alex, right? And it's in jail. She receives more money. She's receiving more support. And she basically tries to manipulate her cellmate. And because his cellmate, Susan, knowing this, did not have a mother, someone in a mother role for her, grew up without a mother. So eventually Susan becomes her mother. And then she's transferred to Greenwood Correctional Facility, to jail. And everyone agrees and starts to see that even though she pretends that she's the head hen, ruling the house, she's actually very manipulative. And people start to see all this. Incidentally, Susan volunteers to play with visitors' children to the jail. So if you're there to see, your sister who's incarcerated and you're talking through the glass, it's nice to know that Susan Smith is playing with your child, in the visiting area.
That's insane. That is totally, totally insane.
How about that? It's as though, and then, so they claim this is her way of, of giving to children what she was unable to give to the children she murdered, right?
That's horrifying.
Absolutely horrifying. I think it's for mostly her acts and devious deeds behind bars that she will be denied parole. It doesn't seem as though she's changed at all. And it sounds as though the same manipulation tactics and lies that she had pushed after she murdered her own children is still going on, but now behind bars. She's manipulating guards. She's manipulating her fellow inmates.
That is an insane story. I just can't believe that they're actually allowing her to play with kids, and the fact that she seems, I don't want to say disturbed, but the whole manipulation and what she's been doing in jail, yeah, definitely doesn't sound like she's going to get out anytime soon. And that is the case of Susan Smith.
I got to throw in here that there is a memorial to Michael and Alex sat at the lake, and it is visited quite often.
Oh, and good.
We can't forget how much this case really affected and caused ripples throughout our society, from accusing a random black person for doing all this, to capital punishment versus not capital punishment, how we treat our children, whether or not we use physical discipline or not. So a lot of this really kind of affected our society in a really interesting way.
Yeah,
but I got it to, so, okay. Sociopath, psychotic. I can't call it.
I can't call it either. I don't know. I mean, the manipulation definitely sounds pretty intense. But
do you sense there's any narcissism involved?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the manipulation, the fact that she thinks that her kids are still potentially alive. I mean, it seems kind of like a psychotic break if you hear it that way, that she's still talking to her kids. I'm surprised she hasn't tried to commit suicide again, honestly.
Now, that's the thing. That's my whole thing. If you really, and she did, she attempted before, and she wanted to die, right? According to her story, with her children. No suicide attempts in jail.
Yeah, which is really, really odd.
She wants parole.
She wants parole, which is, again, like, what? No, you don't get to get out of jail for that. Yeah, that's a crazy case, and disturbing. And also, it's a disturbed individual who needed help. And if she had gotten help, the proper help, and, maybe this wouldn't have happened. But yet she turned out to be a monster who did an awful. I mean, I can't. Yeah, I can't, but, even with the babies.
I could tell you something very graphic, but I won't. Or should I? I don't know.
No, I don't think we need graphic.
Okay, sorry. But it is, I was going to say it all comes back to getting help. Like, I feel like a lot of the cases from Columbine to Angela Simpson, all these cases that we've discussed most recently, and in general, if only they received some mental health.
Yeah.
I feel
mental health help.
Right.
Yeah. If somebody could have noticed. And I mean, granted, our last case, she was in a mental institute, but they let her out. So, we definitely have some issues with mental health stuff in this country, and how.
And now it crosses over to today with regards to guns.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to have these background checks. There's no reason why it's illegal for a convict to have a gun. So it's just there's got to be more attention. It's nice. May is Mental Health Care Awareness Month, but what's happening?
Yeah, we definitely need just much more access to it. And I mean, this was the 90s, and I know that mental health wasn't really talked about back then. So I know it's much more in the forefront now, and yet we still have so far to go with that. And especially with women needing to get extra help after they have babies, because it's overwhelming and the hormones are crazy. And there's postpartum depression is such a thing.
And then you throw into that not getting along with your partner at all.
Yeah. And also sleeping with your stepfather.
Wow.
For that day. Like, just no. Just no.
I feel her circumstances created a monster. I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the fun case. Not really. It was terrible, awful, of Susan Smith. And join us next week. I don't know if we're going to be doing another female case, but we will, we'll see what we got. Thank you so much for listening.
Next week, hopefully you'll be at a racquetball court.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, right. Okay. Okay. Can you hear? Okay. All right. All right. See you guys next week. This episode was sponsored by The Creek Killer, Book 1 in the Harriet Harper thriller series written by me, Dominika Best. What would you do if you read the police found your body in a creek? Find out in The Creek Killer, available on Amazon. Thank you for joining me and listening to this episode. If you like my show, please give me a rating and review. It helps other listeners find this podcast. Follow Dominika Best Presents The Deviant Mind wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit thebeststorytellingnetwork.com, where you'll find show notes, my books, links to social media, and much more. Join my Patreon for special subscriber perks, like 2 extra exclusive episodes a month and a Q&A with me at patreon.com/The Deviant Mind Podcast. Until next time.